Tick, Tick, Boom is the newest feature film from Netflix and the directorial debut of Lin-Manuel Miranda, but is he able to stick the landing with his first feature film? Let's find out. To say it has been a bit of a busy year for Lin-Manuel Miranda would be an understatement. I feel like every time I hear about this guy, he's promoting a new project. This year alone, he not only released his directorial debut, but also his original musical, In the Heights, was adapted into a feature film. Encanto, Pixar's newest movie, features original music from him. That comes out next week. And the crazy part is, that's not even everything that he's done this year. And it's really not that surprising he is staying this busy considering how much of a worldwide sensation Hamilton was. It really was just a matter of time before this guy became such a huge demand in Hollywood. And with his debut film, he turns to a legend of musical theater with Jonathan Larson, the Pulitzer Prize winning composer and playwright behind Rent, who famously passed away the day of his play's first off-Broadway preview performance. And with those of you who are unfamiliar with his work, this movie is based on what was originally an autobiographical one-man show, which Larson performed in 1990. But after his passing, the show was revised and revamped into an off-Broadway production, which premiered in 2001. The show was something Larson worked on before Rent, and this movie doesn't necessarily tell the story of the creation of Rent specifically, but more chronicles the events that lead to him eventually being inspired to create Rent. It's a bit off topic, but I actually wish some music biopics would take note of this movie and be inspired by this movie and this play, because to me, the idea of showing an artist in an important period of their life and how that impacted them going forward is far more interesting. Music biopics, please take note of this movie. Follow in this movie's footsteps. But I think the perspective of this movie makes for this sort of timeless story about this depressive and kind of anxious periods that creatives can fall into, not only when they're working towards creating something and likely have been doing so for a long time, but also what it's like when people just aren't listening to what you have to say or aren't taking a chance on you. And this movie shows how isolating that can be, particularly when you think that the gift that you have to offer is so special and can change the world. And bringing Jonathan to life is the incredibly talented Andrew Garfield, who has also just been phenomenal recently. Even in projects that are okay or don't quite live up to their fullest potential, like something like The Eyes of Tammy Faye, this year's film, for example, Garfield is always fantastic. It's a rare occurrence that he is not the best or one of the better components of a project that he is attached to, and I could just legitimately see a case for why this movie in particular may be his best performance yet. He has so much energy, and his performance has this wonderful sense of anxiety and heart to it, trying to maintain friendships and relationships, but also trying to change the world with your art. In fact, this entire movie really does have this vibrant sense of energy to it, so much so that I could potentially see that some people may find some aspects of this movie a little over the top or a little obnoxious or a little off-putting. But honestly, in my perspective, I think if you were going to make a movie and not have that element of it and that sense of freneticism to it, to this story specifically, I think you'd be sort of betraying the spirit and the heart of what's at the core of this movie. Because this movie does have this sense of urgency to it, not just in the tone and pace, but also thematically too. Because not only is this movie about that sort of isolating feeling of being an aspiring artist, but also someone whose life is entering into a new chapter. See, at this point in Larson's life, he was turning 30. All of his friends were sort of just moving on, and if they were at one point artists, they were kind of abandoning that and transitioning into getting more stable and more reliable jobs. And with that comes so much pressure on Larson to conform and to abscond this pursuit of his dreams and to write jingles for an advertising agency. Sure, it does sound a bit kind of overly sentimental or saccharine, but I think this movie has this sort of infectious nervousness about it, and obviously this deep affection for Jonathan Larson. And I mean, obviously, when you're watching this movie, knowing what eventually does happen to him, it does make this idea of kind of a ticking clock even more resonant. I will say though, and I do think this is one of my more significant issues with the movie, is with this film, there's this idea of a ticking clock and that sense of frustration when the world is not listening to you or kind of letting you have your shot. Although I do think it can be pretty universal, and I think even if you aren't an artist, I think you can relate to someone in that capacity. This movie kind of does make a point to check Larson specifically on not just the kind of self-centeredness of his relationships, but also, more importantly, his privilege. This movie makes a point specifically to say that Larson, being a straight white guy, has a bit more of an opportunity and the means to pursue these dreams, whereas his peers, who are mostly members of the LGBTQ community, are dying of HIV. They don't have that luxury. And from their perspective, yeah, it's kind of hard to hear him out when he's lamenting about turning 30 and he hasn't had his big break yet, when they're turning 30 and that means they only have a few more years left to live, possibly. And because it's such an important perspective to be brought up in this movie, I do think it's a little unfortunate that this. Oh my God, shut the fuck up. And because it's a perspective that I do feel is really important, I think it's a really important perspective to bring up in this movie, especially considering the context. But unfortunately, the movie never really lands on where Larson kind of develops as a result of this point being brought to him. And because that is a perspective that I think is really important and crucial to bring up, I think it is unfortunate that this movie doesn't really do anything besides just kind of bring it up. They don't really show Larson kind of reconciling with this idea. I could hear an argument for how someone could say, well, Larson actually uses that privilege to create something like Rent and uses his platform to bring a light to things like homosexuality, the HIV epidemic, drug addiction. And I think although there is an argument to be made for that perspective, I do think that this movie could have really emphasized that a bit more in a way that could have been a bit more impactful. Really show Larson kind of land on this idea. I'm not really terribly sure what his perspective is, but I think one of the most endearing aspects of Tick, Tick, Boom is that this film really does feel like this big thank you to not only Jonathan Larson, but people like Larson. Artists who either had a difficult road to get to where they are or are currently doing that. I think some stylistic and thematic complaints I have aside, I do think that Lin-Manuel Miranda is someone who is really apt to bring this story to life. Not only because probably has an emotional connection to the source material, but also the fact that he's probably been in Larson's footsteps. And I think a lot of people who watch this movie, creatives or not, are also going to have been there too. So did you guys see Tick, Tick, Boom? What did you think about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you liked today's video. And if you did, you can click on the link down below where you can subscribe to my channel to see more movie reviews and movie related things. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching and see you next time.